is an interview with Hilda Meth. Today's date is January 9th, 2005, and the interview is being conducted by Marie Potosny at the Virginia Holocaust Museum. The videographer is Chuck Weizenhofer. Ms. Meth, will you please tell us your full name?
Hilda Meth.
And how many languages do you speak?
Well and fluently about 5, and enough to get through as a tourist, maybe another 3.
What languages are those?
I speak Hebrew, and that's fluently. Romanian, Yiddish, English, I think so, and speak some Italian. I can get along in French.
And where were you born?
I was born in Romania.
And how old are you?
I am 65.
Okay. So that means you were born in 1939.
39. April 39.
And where do you live now?
Right now I live in Richmond, Virginia, in the west end of the city.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have one older sister.
Okay, and what's her name?
Her name is Judith.
And how old is she?
She is 78.
Okay. And who were your parents?
My parents, their Romanian names were Elias and Neti Meth. I have maintained my maiden name. In Hebrew, they were Eliyahu and Miriam.
Okay. And what occupation did your parents have?
My mother was always a homemaker. My father, number of occupations. His primary occupation, the one he learned as an adolescent, was jeweler. He was a jeweler. And then I would say probably in his late 50s, we had already immigrated to Israel. He decided that he no longer wanted to sit all day long at the jeweler's table, and he became a mailman.
Okay.
He liked to walk.
So at the time of your birth, he was a jeweler?
At the time of my birth, he was a jeweler, yes.
And what was your lifestyle like? Actually, you were probably just a baby in 1939.
Yes, I was.
What do you deduce about your parents' lifestyle and your older sister's lifestyle at the time?
I understand pretty good. Father made a pretty good living, and mother frequently, after we came back from the war, years later, would talk about Monday the manicurist, and Tuesday and Thursday at the hairdresser, and playing cards. And I think the lifestyle was pretty good.
Was your family practicing Judaism a lot?
To some extent, yes. I wouldn't say Orthodox. They were not kosher to their last day, but they maintained traditional things, holidays, and so on.
Did they ever talk about experiencing any sort of anti-Semitism?
Oh, yes. Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Only recently I talked to my sister about that, and she reminded me that when she was in high school, and so that she was like 13, it was right about at the time, a little bit after I was born, around 1940. She was born in 27. She was kicked out of school because she was Jewish. And of course, then everything that followed, taking over the family home, throwing us out, getting us out of town, and so on.
Could you tell more about the specific events of getting kicked out of your home, or what led up to that?
I personally don't remember that much of it. This is all from stories that I heard from my parents and my sister and my aunt. Simply that the Germans came in and took them. And actually what happened is my immediate family, my parents and my sister and I, lived in a town right at the bend of the Danube in Romania, which is in southern Moldavia. The name of the town is Focșani. Well, it's probably more of a village than a town. When we came back from the war, we went back to Fokshan, so I remember Fokshan quite vividly. And there were no asphalt roads in those days. It was all dirt roads, so it wasn't much of a town. But my grandparents lived in northern Moldavia in a place called Radovac, which was not far from Chernovitz in the Ukraine, from that area. And mother was very close to her parents. So when the war came closer and closer to Fokshan, she wanted to be with them up in the north because they were very aging, and my Aunt Rose lived with them. And so my parents and my family went up to be with them, and that's where we were taken.
Okay. And what year was that? Was that in 1939?
That was in September 40.
Okay. And so how long did you live with your grandparents in their home?
Very, very briefly, I understand, a few weeks, because by then they closed my father's business in Fokshan. See, the Romanian natives cooperated with the Nazis. So they wanted everything the Jews had, and so they closed my father's business. And he was afraid for our lives, so he just felt it was better for the whole family to be together. So they just packed up what they could, and they moved on to my grandparents.
Okay. And so then you were living with your grandparents. Did your family feel safe there, or how long?
No, I think it was really a question of being together. I think we all saw the writing on the wall. At least that's what I've been told.
Okay.
Because they were preparing. There were a lot of considerations of what are we going to take with us, what is going to help us survive. Being a jeweler, I understand my father was able to take quite a few precious stones with him and things that from time to time he pulled out and bribed German soldiers and stuff like that. So they were preparing to be moved. They knew. At least that's what they told me.
Okay.
My first memory is actually in the camp. I don't remember the period before that.
Okay. Had your family ever told you the route that you took from living with your grandparents to get to the camp?
Yes, and that's also in the book.
Okay.
I brought a book here that was written by somebody who lived in those camps, who had gone through the war experience there. And the route was through the northern part of Romania, eastwards, and towards a group of villages by the Dniester River in the Ukraine. That's where the camps were set up, and they were basically agricultural labor camps, from what I understand. But what the Germans did is they gathered the Jews and the gypsies and put them together in these villages. And those who were able to work or went into the fields, of course, to support the German armies with food and so on. And those who were not were pretty much done away with.
What was the first memory you have of the concentration camp?
I had spotty memories in the beginning. It's more like little flashes. And it took a long time to really crystallize those, because for the longest time I didn't know what they were and so on. I have very vivid memories of hiding. And that is something that we need to talk about later, about a very young child going through that experience. And I have the memory of one particular little pink wool suit that my Aunt Rose knitted for me from some wool she found, and I wore it, and I was just so proud wearing it. And till now, handwork is very important to me. She taught me a lot of handwork and kept me busy that way and out of the Germans' eyes.
This was an aunt that taught you this?
Yes, that was my mother's sister. There was one sister, her name was Rose, and she was in the traditional Eastern European families, there is usually a daughter who stays home and takes care of the parents, and then when the parents die, takes care of the children of the other sisters and brothers and so on. And that was Aunt Rose.
Okay.
Never married, but everybody's darling,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, loving human being. And she was the one who stayed with us. The five of us. She survived the camp and came back with us. And she lived into her 80s in Israel.
So there were five of you in the camp?
No, we started out quite a few more.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents died there. I have a brother that didn't survive, who was younger than I was. Mother was expecting when they were taken to camp.
Okay.
And you see, the people walked most of the time, from what I was told, to the camp. So it took months to get there. And I understand my brother was born on the way. He died when he was about a year and a half or so.
Okay. So in the course of your life, you've had two brothers and one sister. And
One brother and one sister.
Okay.
That's it. I was the middle child.
Okay.
Yes. My
So-
sister was older than I came, and then my brother was born pretty soon after me.
Okay. And so, could you describe some of the spotty memories that you have of the camp? Or?
Mostly the hiding in one of those dirt cellars. I remember two houses, and I need to make a parenthetic comment here. There is quite a bit of research, and with my background, I looked into that, about the idea of a conspiracy of silence about the events there. And I had asked for years and years and years, and both my parents and my sister had avoided answering questions. And during the war in '91, the Gulf War, I went as a volunteer to Israel as a psychologist to a residential school because I speak Hebrew. And when the war ended, it was a Friday, I went to Jerusalem to my family. My parents were both still alive. They died in their 90s. They lived long lives. And my sister is there too. And I asked her to go have lunch with me, and we went to a restaurant, and I turned over a paper placemat and started drawing floor plans of two houses. And I said, this is what I remember, and this is what I remember. And here there is noise, and here are the contents of my nightmares. It's time you told me. And her initial response was, you know, we always try to protect you from that. And I said, well, this does not help. Protecting doesn't help. Somebody like me who's gone through that needs closure and needs to know. And I think this is very important, and that's why I'm doing this, is if there are any children who are going through trauma, people need to understand that they need to work it out and get the closure. What she told me was that the first house that I described was the cellar where I had a lot of incidents of hiding. I had a lot of memories of hiding. That is apparently where I hid every day. And Rose would teach me something in the evening when they came from the fields or from wherever they worked, like a particular embroidery stitch or knitting or something. And I had to show her in the evening what I did all day. And I would sit in that cellar very close to the light, as close as I could. And that's apparently how I escaped from being found. That's the family theory, or the family myth, or story, or whatever you want to call it. That was the first house. As people were dying more and more, or were being killed by the Germans pushed people, more and more people, into less and less houses in that community, so that they wouldn't need as many soldiers to guard them. And that is where the second nightmare comes in. And the second one is just a very large room with many bodies on the floor. And occasionally there's a knock on the window and a hand with a loaf of bread. And what my sister told me is that, and there is very loud noise, and she was just shocked. She said, that was the last house they pushed us into It was near the road. The noise you were hearing were the German tanks retreating. And yes, there were like 20 of us sleeping on the floor there. And occasionally somebody would bring us food. Apparently it was near a forest and there were partisans in the forest and they knew about it and they brought us food. So those are the two major dwellings and the major memories. Now it's much clearer. The second one is much clearer. And the trip back I remember fairly vividly because by then I was 4.5, almost 5, so I remember fairly vividly. But I have those two pictures of those two houses. One was the cellar and one was the large room in the bodies.
So you spent the first part of it actually in hiding, as opposed to your sister who probably went to the work.
Right, my sister went to work. Right, she was a teenager and she went to work. And yeah, I was in hiding most of the time. Now, I don't know exactly what I was hiding in the second one, because the second one, we seem to have been there a very short period of time. That was already towards the end, as the Germans were retreating, and there was a lot of chaos among them. And there were apparently some soldiers who were relatively kind and did want to help some of the people. I do know I do remember some traumatic experiences. I remember the pain and the screaming when they took my father one day and he came back with a broken leg. They beat him because they wanted to know if he had any more gems. And gems were finished, they were gone or whatever. And that leg never healed right. And so they broke his leg, and that was his right leg. And that scene, I still can hear it. As I said, they're spotty memories. I have had a lot of dreams about my brother and the incident of his death, and there is a discussion about that, and I don't know which one it is, whether what I remember is it or whether what my sister tells me it is. I happen to remember a shooting, and I see it very vividly. My sister tells me that he died of a disease. I don't know what the truth is. Okay. I am still very suspicious that there's all that need to protect me and for me not to know everything and just let it go. Because I asked a very simple question. In our little village near Jerusalem, my family moved to Israel in 1952 and lived in a village called Moza, which is right outside Jerusalem. Lovely little village. And there is an antique synagogue there, which the community restored. And there is a plaque of life, with names of people who have died, and light bulbs for their yizkor, for their memorial. And my grandparents are there, my uncles and aunts are there, everybody's there except my brother. And I said, why isn't there a plaque for Norbert? I wasn't even sure about his name for a long time. And this has been a process of about 20 years trying to extract that information. They were very reluctant to give it. So I'm not quite sure what was around that child, but I imagine it was very traumatic.
And that feeds into sort of the spotty memories.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. But I remember him very vividly. I do.
Were you left at home while your family went to the work camps?
Yes. I was left alone. And this is a big dilemma, because I have talked to a number of survivors, and I have talked to a number of people who have studied this. And even my advisor in college said to me one day, you couldn't be that young or you couldn't have been in camp. Well, they're both true. I don't know how and why I survived, but somehow there was an instinct there. And that cellar was a big help. I think between Aunt Rose and the cellar, it worked.
What do you remember about your brother?
I just remember him kind of walking around, cute little kid with big brown eyes, big smile. I'm the only redhead in the family. Everybody else is very dark, with big brown eyes. And Rose was a redhead with blue eyes. So I always kind of fantasized that maybe she was my mother.
You loved your Aunt Rose?
Very much.
Did she come out of the camps with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she's the one that told her she lived into her 80s. She actually came back to Romania with us, and then decided she had enough and she wanted to be independent. She was in her 40s, mid-40s, and she just picked up stuff and went to Israel and made a life for herself in Israel. And we followed her a couple of years later, and I was very close to her. I lived there 7 years, and then I would come from the United States often to see her. And she died in 1985. Literally days before my second marriage. But she did very well on her own afterwards. And what she did was very interesting. She made a living with handwork, with embroidery and stuff like that. She worked for an organization which many people who travel to Israel are familiar with the stores, called Vitzo, which is, they do native Yemenite embroideries and things like that, Israeli embroideries. And she did things for them, and she would sell it to them, and that's how she made a living. She loved to do handwork.
Mm-hmm. She seems responsible for most of your education when you were a young child.
She was. She was. She's responsible, I think, for my attitudes, my ethics, and a lot. She's the one who took the time. I have to say, in my parents' defense, especially my father, that he worked very long hours trying to support the family. There wasn't much time. And then, being kind of a traditional Eastern European, the fact that God gave him 2 girls wasn't a great deal to him. So he wasn't all that close to the daughters. I think things would have been different if my brother lived.
Mm-hmm. It would have brought him back into the circle of the family.
Probably. Again, I've tried to understand all of that, and I've read about it quite a bit, and there's some wonderful research done by a woman by the name of Hannah Robb, who actually did a dissertation on it. And she talks about the men and the war and the concentration camps and what it did to the men's egos and how it deflated them and the guilt that they felt for not being able to protect the families and all of that.
Do you see your father in that?
I often wondered about it. He was kind of beaten and down, and he managed and he worked very hard, but he had a sense that he needed to do that. And he didn't have a lot of fun, and he didn't teach us to enjoy life. And yet, from everything I was told before the war, Father had a tremendous sense of adventure, and he took the family to Venezuela, and he took the family to Spain, and he opened a business in Venezuela and ran a restaurant, and he was kind of an adventurer, and he loved life, and he was curious, and he learned languages very quickly. And that was something in our family. That's something we would sit around the table and see. We had no television or anything in the little village in Romania, and we'd start with one word in one language, and then we had to see how many languages could we come up with that word. And there was a spirit there that I have often wondered, but as I grew up, I didn't see it, and I wondered whether he lost that after the war, because he was very focused after the war on just really living day to day. And little things became very important to him, and being super efficient about certain things, like putting a tea kettle on the heater so that he had double use for the heat to make a cup of tea, and things like that. And I just often wondered about that. because they were telling me that he had written plays before the war and he would act in the local amateur groups. So I had all this imagery of a really perky and energetic young man. It wasn't there after the war.
And what about your mother?
Mother was kind of your traditional housewife, keeping the house clean and everything nicely ironed and straightened out and beautifully folded, and having an exemplary closet was very important to her. And cooking and taking care, that was Mother.
What kind of work did your family do at the work camp?
From what I understand, it was all in the field.
Okay.
It was all in the fields.
And what was the name of the work camp?
Zabokridge. The name of the work camp was Zabokridge. It was I wouldn't know how to spell it in English, but you were talking about I don't know if you can see the map. It also has the arrows of how people came. We came from this area. Can you see that? We came from this area. Zabokridge is right here.
Okay.
By the way, these are all mass graves.
Okay.
These little squares. These are all indications of Kvarim Hamonim, mass graves. And we came this group this way, because we came from this area. But you may have heard of the larger city in this area that's Mogilev. It's near Mogilev.
Okay.
Zabokridge is not far from there, but that was the name of the village.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. I think this is a slightly better map showing this. In Hebrew it says Romania, okay? And this is the northern Romanian, where I was told you where we were, where my grandparents were, right here, okay? And we went in this direction, and the other map kind of finishes that up.
Okay.
But we came from here,
Okay.
okay?
Well, you brought two items with you that you kept through the concentration camp. Do you want to talk about those to show us what those are and why they're important to you?
Yes, I guess so. This is, it's, it's heavy for me till today, but it is a runner. It is one of a very coarsely made Romanian type of native carpet, peasant carpet. And what my Aunt Rose did as they were preparing for the days when they know, is she somehow sewed it together. When I saw the big bags of the carpetbaggers in the United States, it reminded me of that. She made it into a large bag where they could take essentials with them. But so this is what this is. I mean, it's huge, and it's heavy, and I don't know how they. You can see how frayed it is and everything, and it has some Ukrainian mice got to it at one point and made a couple of holes. And I tried. Oh, here. Yeah, and I tried to repair it, and I was told that there is no way to repair it because of the way it's made. I don't know anything about that. It's apparently made on burlap and sewn from both sides.
Okay.
So I guess that's as important a whole as any.
Was this in your home originally?
And Rose took it.
Okay.
And when I came on one of the trips to Israel, when I was already an adult and married, she gave it to me and she said, "Here's your dowry." So this is my dowry.
That's beautiful.
And this is the other item. The family was, they were very worldly. My family, they were world traveled, spoke languages and so on. So a napkin holder was a place for toothpicks was very important.
Mm-hmm.
And that had traveled a lot. So, and this is typical Romanian work, burnt wood, very simple little item. But those are the two items I have that Aunt Rose has handed me as my dowry. So they're about 60, 70 years old.
And these stayed with you. Well, first of all, this was sewn up so that it could be carried like a carpet
Right,
bag. Okay.
right.
And that was one of the items that was probably put here.
Apparently,
Okay.
because it's traveled.
Yeah.
They they taught me manners even in the concentration camp. That was very important. Yes. I put it on the floor once, and I thought, we really need to use that. And then I said, no, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, maybe one day I'll put it someplace on a long wall or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe give it to a museum. I haven't decided. But that's it. Okay? We can just leave it here if you want and fold it later.
Okay. Well, and you said that it had lots of different uses while you were in the camp.
Mm-hmm. You know, to sleep on,
Mm-hmm.
to cover with, but mainly to sleep on because it did give a little bit more protection than the hard floors. As far as I remember, the floors were wood, but they were pretty rough wood. They were not your nicely polished American woods.
You entered the work camp in the year 40 or 41?
40 well, actually, no, we probably didn't get there till 41 because it took about 6 months to get there.
Okay.
And we were there until April 44.
Okay.
We were liberated in April 44. And this story I finally got out of my sister because I remembered something that triggered me. That lunch that we had in 91 was an extensive lunch. And I asked every question, and I did not let her get out of her chair until she answered them all. I needed to have answers. Apparently, the decision was that the German soldiers would leave and the SS troops would come behind them and exterminate everybody in the camp.
Okay.
And the partisans took over the camp and took us into the woods.
Okay.
And that's why we survived.
Okay.
And we walked from Zabokric back to Fokshan almost a year. Now that I remember. I remember different incidents. We would walk for a little while and we would stop in a town and Dad would get some work quickly. People liked jewelers because they could make pretty things. And Dad was quite an entrepreneur. He knew how to do things and how to make things happen. And sometimes he would get a peasant with a cart and oxen to take us a few miles. And I remember being on top of hay and carts and things like that. So slowly we came to Fokshan. And we came to our old house, and of course the Romanians were living in it. We did get a house. We didn't get the house that we originally had. And then we moved to another house that was a little bigger, and things got better again until the communists came, and at that point we ran away again.
On your journey back to
Fokshan.
Did you? It sounds like your dad was very smart about finding work and getting you home. Did you ever experience any sort of anti-Semitism or?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And very protective. Dad was very protective, and he was very careful. They knew as we were coming that we were Jews from the camp. As a matter of fact, I had a very strange experience in the late 80s in New Orleans. I went for a conference, for a professional conference, and it was right there piggybacking with Mardi Gras. And my husband and I were having dinner at a restaurant, and next to us was another young couple, and we just struck up a conversation. It was kind of a bigger booth situation. And the woman heard my accent, and she said, where are you from? And I said, from Romania. She says, aha, one of those Jewish refugees. You could feel the anti-Semitism immediately, and they stopped talking. So it's not just there and then.
How did that, like, in 1980 in New Orleans in the United States, to have, like, all that come flush right up to you, how did that make you feel at that time?
Angry.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. But at the same time, I kind of giggled. And I said, you know, she can't do anything about the fact that I'm sitting here and eating dinner.
You had felt like you
A victory, yeah. But it made me angry and sad that it's still around, but maybe also aware that it's very around. I tried for a while not to be too aware of it, but it's here. It's here. Now, I don't know what's written on my forehead that immediately tells you that I'm a Jewish refugee from Romania. I don't think there's anything there, but she sensed it immediately. So it was interesting.
And when you were liberated in '44 by the partisans, do you remember any of that part of it?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yes. I like the partisans. They played with me, you know. Yes, we played and we ran on the wood. I remember. I have some memories, you know, flashes of memories and kindness, and there was food, you know.
At last.
Yes, there was food, right, and there wasn't waiting to see whether it would come or not. And they laughed. And Aunt Rose was very playful, and she loved to laugh too. And I think for the first time I actually may have felt a feeling of security. It felt safe. Yeah. I spent 20 years after the war to find my father's branch of the family. We had a lot of information on mother's branch, but we had none on father's. And I found, he was the baby of 6, and I found the descendants of 4 of the other 5. As it turned out, the 5th was never married, and I did find information on him in a very strange place, of all the places in the genealogy library in Utah, in Salt Lake City. They have the records of the German extermination camps, and I found him in there. But as I found each cousin, and I still found one uncle in Brazil, and father was able to go visit him before he died. That was like in the 70s. My husband and I headed out for Hungary to meet the Hungarian branch in Budapest, and that was still while the communists were in Hungary. And one of my cousins had been a major in the Russian army during the war. Very communist, very idealistic about that, and so on. And we were sitting and talking and one day, and I told him the story of the partisans saving us and so on. And he said, see, the Russians, the Russian army, aren't they wonderful? And I said, and I'm so grateful that they did that, because now I can sit with you here today. So it was very interesting. Things come in circles. Yeah.
And when you went back to your hometown, you said you didn't live in the same home?
No.
Okay. Someone in your family was living there?
Yeah, and they kind of took ownership of places. That's happened in many places.
Yeah. And so what was that like going back to your hometown?
For me, it was going to a new place, because remember, I was a baby when we left, and I didn't have a lot of memory about it. And I do have memories of going to school, and I went to school, and again, coming from a family that had a lot of education in their background, and education was very important, and they preoccupied that little nasty kid, was teaching her things all the time. So I walk into kindergarten, I'm 5 years old, maybe 6, 5.5, whatever, and I just know a lot of things, except that was the first time I saw a chair. They handed me a chair, and I didn't know what to do with it. And finally, the kids were giggling, I'll never forget that, and the teacher said, just bend, bend. Okay. After a few weeks, they took me out of class, because I must have been in a lot of trouble. And they sent me to somebody who played with me with blocks and so on. Years later, it turned out it was a psychologist, and they put me ahead in first grade. So I was always a year younger than everybody in my class. But I basically went straight to school in Romania, and that's what happened.
Who were your other classmates?
There were some Jewish, and there were some Romanian Christian. The church there is the Eastern Orthodox. I remember we had twins who came to our village. They were in my class, and they had Auschwitz numbers. They were identical twins, and the only way we could tell them apart was by the numbers. But I would say that it was one of those one-room schools. It was a little village, and we sat by grade. And later on, there were 3 or 4 rooms, and there were different settings. But I don't remember any animosity among the children. And the Jewish group that was there was very Zionist and very strong in the village, because as a group we organized and immigrated to Israel afterwards. So there was very strong Zionism in there.
How long was it after you returned to that village that you organized in this group?
I would say probably within a couple of years. I remember the first groups, because they organized everybody, children into groups and adults into groups, and we had names, and we had, we were cells. And I mean, even my little class, we were like 7 or 8 years old. We had a little group, and we had an organization. And the purpose was basically education. I was taught Hebrew very young. And by the time I came to Israel at age 12, I was fluent in Hebrew. There was no problem. So in our village, and I remember my father started buying books, and he had all these books in Yiddish and in Hebrew. So I saw the printed words, and so he had the full works of Shalom Aleichem and the full works of this, of Hilda Meth parrots and so on. So I was introduced to all of that very early, and he would read them, and he would tell the story at dinner time. He loved to read, and he would share a lot of that. Mother did too, but her eyesight failed early and somehow never really recovered well. So reading was more difficult for her. They were both readers, but father was an avid reader. And the girls, both my sister and I, we swallow books. So he instilled that in us. But I think a lot of the stories were told that way, and a lot of the culture and the community organized. There was one young woman who was very fluent in Hebrew, and they designated her as the teacher, and they actually called her Mora. That was her nickname, which is Hebrew for teacher. And she taught all the little ones and taught us Hebrew, and we would go twice a week to her house, and she would teach us. And if you did your lesson really well, she had a special treat for you, and she was really good.
I imagine you got many of those special treats.
I certainly did. That's where my weight problem is. No, but she did a great. I was surrounded by really good people when we came back. I have fond memories from that, even from my Romanian friends. I'm sorry that I left. I was 12 years old, and I never kept in touch with them. But and I never went back to Romania itself. But my school experiences were good, and I learned a lot. The Romanian method was memorizing. They just stuffed you with facts. And so the Israeli education was quite a shock for me.
So it sounds like your family, your parents in this community decided that they wanted to move to Israel.
Oh yes, that decision was there. I have a feeling that decision was there pre-war. Because as long as I can remember, we were talking about Israel. As a matter of, and we called it Palestine. That was before it was officially Israel. And it was so potent that everything good was put aside for Israel. And we had a family joke afterwards, because Rose made me a beautiful little black velvet dress for holidays with a little white. She would do lacing, white collar, and so on. So you did everything yourself. You didn't have machines and all of that. And they put it aside for Palestine. And of course, by the time we went, it was too small on me. So Mother, who occasionally would put things aside to be used later, my sister and I would say, what, for Palestine? You know? And it became kind of a family joke. Yes, yes. It was like the dream. We will all go there and we will be safe there. Mm-hmm. That is the Jewish place.
Well, when you were, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you're still a kid and you probably still want things like a pretty dress or, how was that for you to always be putting aside for, do you remember that being a part of it?
That's their American thinking. I'm not that way. No, what I really wanted were a lot of books. I remember my sister dating a young man, and he asked me and he was very assimilated into the Romanian culture, so he celebrated Christmas. So he took me aside, and he had figured out that if he gets on my good side, maybe he'll get on my sister's good side. So he said, what would you like for Christmas? So I gave him a list of books. Yeah, I wanted books, and when I woke up Christmas morning, along the window there were all these books. I was thrilled. That was what I really wanted. As far as clothes, even in adulthood, I was never really much of a clothes horse, I'm afraid. Mm-hmm. I spent 30 years in T-shirts and blue jeans with children. So, but I did get books. That was fun.
Were you sad, were you sad to leave your community in Romania that you had put roots in? Or?
No, I wasn't. We left overnight. The communists had come. See, the king was in Romania until 1947. So at that time, people who were doing well, and my sister married a landowner with vineyards, so they were considered capitalist. We were doing well, but then the communists took over, and the Russian army occupied the village. So we had a big Russian garrison there. And by then, it didn't get so comfortable. And you would hear at home parents very quietly talking about that. How are we going to get out of here, and so on. And there were all kind of unpleasant incidents, especially because my father was a jeweler. I remember in particular one day the police coming in and wanting to find jewels and gold which were forbidden by the government. If he was a jeweler, he had to have them. And I knew he had them, and I knew where he had them. And I excused myself, and I was like 9 or 10 years old, and grabbed them and told the policeman, excuse me, but I have to go do homework with a friend or something. And left home with the jewels. Of course, as soon as the police left, my father went to look for them and didn't find them. And I came home so proud because I had everything, And he was pretty upset with me that I didn't at least tell him what I did. But we all knew the children were taken into the family secrets, and we all protected each other. These are all things that I didn't understand for a long time. First you do them instinctively, and then as an adult later on, at least I kind of thought about them a whole lot. Mm-hmm. Why did I do these things? What would I do? What do I tell my children about me? That is a really tough question. Mm-hmm. But the children were taken into the family confidences to protect the family.
And you did?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, no question. Mm-hmm. No question, you would never betray your family.
So you had, what was it like, not 4 or 5 years after you had to leave one home because of the Nazis to have to get...
But Israel was the dream.
Yeah.
I remember the boat. And again, we were smuggled to the port, to Constanța. We had a friend who was a policeman. My father was a tremendous networker and taught me that. And he made a deal with the policeman. He gave him the house. The house was always the deal. If he got us to the port, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister went to visit years later, and they were living in the house. She saw them and so on. I have never had the desire to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Got them to the port. What I remember was standing on the deck of the boat and seeing Haifa at night and saying, my God, it looks like one of Daddy's brooches, like the diamond. I was excited about going to Israel. I think they instilled in me an excitement about the future. You speak Hebrew, you're going to be okay there, you're going to get the education you want, you're going to do what you want, you're going to be free.
Yeah.
And so, no, I was not sorry to leave Romania, and I was kind of glad to get to Israel.
Was it all that Israel lived up to when you got there?
No.
How so?
I have a problem with that. Like in every country, I guess people who've been there first don't like the people who come there later.
Yeah.
And I had an uncle in Pittsburgh, my mother's older brother, who came to see us. They haven't seen each other in like 40 years. And he came to see us when we arrived to Israel. And he had a connection to the principal in a very fancy kind of a high school for gifted in Jerusalem. So he moved us from, we were brought to a camp in Beersheba where they brought the new immigrants. So he moved us to the camp, to Jerusalem, to, he got us a little apartment outside in that little village in Moza. And he got me into that school. But I was the only immigrant child in my class. Everybody else was born in Israel, so you don't get invited to birthday parties, you don't get invited to anything, you speak funny Hebrew with a little accent. It took a couple of years, and it was rough for a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And I was politically a pacifist, so that wasn't too easy. And no, Israel, I have a great affinity for it, but I have a little bit of a problem with the social issues there.
Okay.
And that's, I married an Israeli the first time. Maybe that was the problem.
Maybe. And when you got to be at college age, you came to the United States.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
To study?
Yes, I came to study. That's exactly what I came for.
And what was your choice of study?
I started out in microbiology. I was in pre-med.
Okay.
And I was pregnant and I couldn't handle the labs. So I moved to psychology. And I became eventually a psychologist.
And you've talked to me a little bit about how your experiences growing up helped shape who you are as a psychologist. Do you still feel that way?
Chipper, I'm not sure.
May have like influenced why you chose psychology? Or
I chose psychology. Well, you know, I really came here and I told this to one of my first advisors who asked me why I'm here. I said, well, I want to learn to heal children. That's my first goal. And second, I want to be free, if I choose, to become a millionaire by the time I'm 65. And to do what I want with my time. And to just be free. I think that free spirit got me in trouble a lot. And that's what I did. I spent 31 years healing children. And most of the time it was wonderful. Sometimes it was not, but that's the lot of, But I liked what I did. I had a real sense of accomplishment and of giving some meaning to all of this. Because I think children need adults who love them unconditionally. And I've treated my children that way. I hope I treat my grandchildren that way. You know, I still love children.
Do you feel free now?
Yes, I do. I definitely do now. Yes. I feel I don't feel inhibited in any way. What I do is not always approved of, but I feel very free, yes. And I think it gave me the strength to do that.
One of the things we talked about over the phone before the interview took place is how you like to put in perspective your experiences in the Holocaust and how they don't make the sum total of who you are, and you don't want to always talk about it. And in fact, this is the first time that you've ever done an interview about it.
That's true.
What is your choice to come talk about it? Why did you decide to come talk about it now?
It's been actually a little evolutionary, and I think my neighbor gave me the last push. I've had a number of experiences. One of them was last year, was a group of adolescents at a middle school in Chesterfield, where their drama teacher called me. She is a friend of a friend, and she wanted to know, they were doing a play about a child in the Holocaust, and would I mind coming and talking about my experience? And I said, I would be glad to come and talk with experience under one condition. I have a particular slant, and I want to have the freedom to express that slant. If you want me to talk about how horrible it was, I'm not coming. It was horrible, and I will talk a little bit about it. But my main goal is for youngsters to understand that you can go through the most horrible experiences and you can still make a life for yourself. And you shouldn't despair. You should be positive. You should be loving. And if you network with loving people and you're loving yourself, you will be okay, and you will be able to do some wonderful things with your life. And she thought it was a great idea. And she agreed to it, and I came, and I spoke to 6 different groups. And about 3 or 4 months later, she called me up and she said, I just found it. Can I drop something at your house? And I said, what is it? But come on in. And she came, and there was a large envelope, and there were 140 personal notes from the kids. And there were 5, 6 themes running through the notes. But the major theme was, it made me look at my life differently. You gave me a jolt. I need to look at some of the things I do, and maybe I need to rethink what I want to do. And that's really the main reason I came here. I know it was a horrible thing, and I know Holocausts are horrible, and what happened 2 weeks ago in Southeast Asia is horrible. And there are going to be a lot of children who are very traumatized. And I think we need to find every possible way to give them the message and the hope and whatever else is needed, support or whatever, to understand that they can still have a life and make a life. Because I did some pretty crazy things in my life, and I did what I wanted. You asked if I'm free. Yes, I was and am. You know, I learned to fly airplanes. I got my PhD, and nobody paid for it. And it's doable, and these kids need to know that. They're very traumatized now, and they need to know that it's doable. And I think that's the main reason I came.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful message.
Thank you.
Well, is there any other thing? Well, you brought some pictures. You want to show us
I
this?
brought basically a couple of pictures. One picture, I don't know if you can see that, my father and my mother. That was in the 1980s. They were about 80. They were just 6 months apart in age. They were both born in 1902.
Is this in Israel?
This is in Israel, in my parents' home in 1983. So they were about 81.
Okay.
Beautiful people. I'm the tallest in the family and the only one over 5 feet. Everybody was very little. So that's the only picture I could find of my parents. And you can see that there was still some life there and joy and so on. There wasn't sadness. Mother she was kind of, she was tired.
Mm-hmm.
Mother was tired. But father died gardening. He slipped. He was 93 years old. And he slipped on a rock and hit his head. He was gardening for his favorite garlic. And this is a picture of me with a friend. At the last, by the last plane, I owned a share in this. Last plane I flew. It's a retractable Cessna. That was another airplane. Before that one was younger a few years, but I flew about 12 years, and that was lovely. I enjoyed it. Flew with the Civil Air Patrol. Did cadet orientation. I always enjoyed working with youngsters. Did cadet orientation, took them over King's Dominion, and they had to identify all the rides, and that was their job. So it was fun.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you feel is important that you want to say on this video before we bring it to a close?
I really, my main reason is to remember life. Life is what's important. And to make the most of it. And to live to the utmost. Glorify life and not death necessarily. I think that's my feeling.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.